Hi guys, Chris here with Super Savvy Travelers, and we are back with Nick Metta because guess what? We have a lot of questions about what the heck is going on with Australia. And I will be honest, I was researching this morning and I could not find any up-to-date information on the reciprocity treaties, what's happening right now, and how that affects Australians and possibly other countries that have reciprocity treaties. So Nick is going to address all of that with us right now and some questions that we have. Good morning, Nick.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you.
Good, good. Okay, well, let's dive right in on this Australian thing. And I was preparing for this morning and had seen some things on some of the expat forums, and Facebook groups, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't know what's happening with Australia. And somebody said, here's the most update article, and it said, oh yeah, no problem, go buy, go buy your property in Italy. And I think that's not quite correct. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes. The problem with Australia is, as you mentioned it, is reciprocity, meaning in Italy and in many countries, there is a rule according to which foreigners can buy properties in Italy if Italians are entitled to the same right in that foreigner's country. So when you look at Australia, Australia has set up some restrictions and requirements when it comes to individuals buying properties in Australia. So there has been for a long time, and it still is not right now, a discussion about whether those restrictions represent a limitation for Italians to buy property in Australia. Before getting into specifically the details of what those restrictions are and why there's all this debate in Italy, I would like to step back for a second and just describe briefly how the system works in Italy when a foreigner buys a property in Italy, an Italian property. So in Italy, the system is very different from systems like in Australia or the US or the UK. Italy is a civil law country, whereas in those other jurisdictions, they adopt common law. And one of the big differences is the role of the person who certifies the transaction, the sale. In Italy, in civil law countries, it is a notary. And notary in Italy is a legal professional who has gone through law school and has passed a very, very difficult law exam, notary exam to be precise. And it's not just an exam, there are just a few spots made available by the government every year. So the government every year decides how many notaries can be elected, can be appointed, and there will be, people who will take the exam, and only so many people, as many as the spots available, if they qualify, they will make it. So once that happens, a notary is assigned to a specific local district of Italy, and they have jurisdiction pretty much over that district. And usually in small villages, you might not have any notary. Sometimes a notary has jurisdiction over multiple villages. Like in Scalea and that area, there are just very few notaries for a handful of towns, local towns. Some of those towns don't have a notary. I'm not sure if Scalea has a notary. Perhaps there is a notary with multiple offices in the local, region. So a notary in Italy represents the government in the interpretation of the law and in the verification, the check of the requirements for the transaction to go through. And the requirements are extremely wide, from subjective requirements of the individuals participating into the transaction to the objective requirements. The piece of property must meet certain requirements in order to be sold. We have talked about building compliance, building permit compliance. If a property doesn't have all the building permits, is not suitable for sale, and the notary is the one who should flag it and stop the transaction to go through. And the same goes for inabilities of individuals who might have an issue with, for example, lucidity, lack of mental capacity or other legal restrictions and so forth. So in common law countries, in contrast, notaries have way more restricted authority. Let's say they have a license. Usually, licenses are issued on a test basis, meaning you take the test, you get a license. There's not a cap to how many notaries you can have. And usually this is very limited in what a notary can do. Usually it's limited to the certification of signature authentication and identification, of the person who is signing a certain specific document.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it usually. And now that you will see where I'm going with this. When I say that in Australia, the Australian legislation, according to the Australian legislation, there are certain restrictions as to what foreigners, so also Italians, can buy in Australia, and under what circumstances. For example, we could, in a nutshell, summarize it to the sense that, in the sense that Australia wants to make sure that investments are not conflicted with national security and are in the interest of the national economy. So essentially, they want foreigners, so people who are not of national citizenship or people who are not living in Australia with a legal immigration permit, to have to get an authorization where basically they need to apply for a approval. They need to get approval to show that what they want to buy is, for example, I'm not going to list all the options, but basically, essentially, that they want to buy a home because they want to use that home once they are in Australia, or they want to buy a home because they want to significantly refurbish it because they want to rehab it. And if you think about the parallel with what we experience with, your followers, my clients, usually people buy in Italy is because they love Italy. They want to go and spend time in their home rather than renting every time a more anonymous place, or they want to buy a €1 home or a home to be fully refurbished, and so that brings value, and that's the mindset. So Australia is happy to promote tourism and happy to promote some form of investment that helps the economy on a more holistic manner. Like you buy a home, you will hire a contractor and then an architect, professionals. You will basically also, they talk in terms of increasing the housing stock of the nation. So if the authority that receives the approval application verifies that these conditions are met, and usually they are met on a self-declaration basis, like I want to buy the property for this and this reason. At the end of the day, the approval, based on data that I have reviewed from people from, especially Australian authorities, Australian professionals who work in this field, in most cases, approvals are granted.
Okay.
So in Italy, there is not such authority where you can file this type of application. There is a legal system that sets up the requirements, and then the vetting process is deferred to a notary. And the notary, in that sense, acts almost like a judge in a court of law, because the notary in Italy is neutral. The notary in Italy will ask questions to the parties, to the seller and the buyer, will look at the documents, will ask for clarifications. Many times, I'm sure you have had experience, many times, last meeting, the notary might ask more documents because might not be fully satisfied with something. Mm-hmm. In many cases, especially in Tuscany, for example, a notary will ask for a certified surveyor, a licensed surveyor, to issue an affidavit confirming that the property in Italy is fully compliant and meets the compliance, building permit compliance requirements, so it can be legally sold. Other notaries in Italy will not ask for that unless they have a sense, based on the documents and the information and the communication, even informally exchange with the parties, mm-hmm. make the notary convinced that it would be prudent to acquire that additional document, that additional affidavit, whatever it is.
Uh,
So sometimes I'll give you another example what a notary will do in Italy. A notary, when you show up to sell a property on behalf of someone else on the basis of a power attorney, if the power attorney is on behalf to sell on behalf of a very elderly person, and if it was issued, let's say, a year ago, 2 years ago, the power attorney is formally valid, but the notary might ask for proof of life.
yeah.
So I might ask for a doctor to certify in the principal's home country that that person is still alive through a notarization in front of a notary overseas. Or so a notary has that discretional power, authority to determine when a situation is lawful or when it needs to be verified with more investigations. So, according to some notaries, at least, as I said, there are differences between even not only notaries for notary and notary, but also notaries depending on the district where they live and the socioeconomic condition, all that of those areas. So, because notaries in Italy are also, this is very important, professionals. They are self-employed, so they're professionals, and each of them has their own professional interpretation of certain rules and regulations. So you may find a notary who might have a certain approach in a situation and a notary who has a different approach. Many times we will switch notary to complete a transaction if we initially had appointed a notary who doesn't share our view of the law for that specific case. Because we
Right.
can have a notary say, no, I will not certify this transaction because I believe that this is not correct. We actually, it happens, I don't want to say many times, but sometimes it happens when it comes to the application of international rules of inheritance or of matrimonial property or international rules that if you don't work with the notary who has had significant experience, you might have, a notary who says, I'm not sure. I don't want to get into it. There is professional liability involved.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't agree with this view, so go somewhere else. And the same happens now. The full circle comes to an end. The same happens when we deal with Australians willing to buy properties in Italy.
Okay.
And so what we recommend is before placing a purchase offer, when you are an Australian, you want to buy a home in Italy, and I would like to go also through a lot of exceptions many people don't think about. So we'll go to that too in a second. But if you are an Australian citizen, you want to buy a home in Italy, our recommendation is either one of two approaches. One is place a purchase offer where you have a contingency according to which if your notary says that you cannot close the transaction, you can withdraw, get your money back with no penalties. The other approach, which sometimes is possible, sometimes not, depending on the circumstances, but you want to approach a notary beforehand and share with the notary the information and a draft of the purchase offer and get the notary approval. And if the notary says that you cannot buy because of lack of reciprocity, doesn't mean that you cannot buy necessarily.
Right.
Because, and let me now get to the point. In our opinion, in our practice, we feel that there is reciprocity. Without getting too technical, reciprocity doesn't have to be exactly regulated in the same manner. The principle of international reciprocity is a principle of substance. So the substantive law needs to be there to allow Italians to buy property in Australia as Australians can buy properties in Italy. And since Italians who want to buy properties in Australia, doesn't matter, they have to apply for a pre-approval. there are requirements. And so if you want to buy a home as a vacation holiday or to refurbish it or one of those other circumstances, you as an Italian can buy a property in Australia. It doesn't matter a couple of steps. The same will go for Australians. If you want to buy a home in Italy as an Australian, an Italian notary, if you buy in Tuscany, might ask you for the certificate of compliance, might ask you for some other documents. But at the end of the day, you have the entitlement to buy a home in Italy because substantially an Italian can buy a property in Australia. And this interpretation is not just a feeling, obviously, it is backed up by other two circumstances that are extremely in favor of reciprocity. One is that the principle of reciprocity is checked also considering if the two countries have diplomatic reciprocity and recognition. And obviously there is there between Italy and Australia. But the second one is that Italy and Australia signed a treaty, a bilateral agreement of reciprocity, specifically addressing real estate, where they said, let's make sure that we help our respective citizens to make real estate investments in our country, in our respective countries. So there is a treaty, there is diplomatic reciprocity, and there is de facto ability for Italians to buy homes in Australia, although there is the approval process with which statistics show in most cases has a positive result. Okay. So that's the scenario. And but obviously you might find a notary who hasn't studied the matter necessarily deeply enough to have the confidence to take an Australian buyer through the transaction.
Right. Okay. And that differs from Canada. Is that right? I want to make sure I fully understand because
that's unfortunate. Yeah. Yes, unfortunately, that's different from Canada because Canada doesn't have that exception, like the approval process. Canada has a blanket ban that says if you're buying a residential property, you cannot if you are not a Canadian citizen. So Canada doesn't say you can unless you promise that you will not use it for commercial purposes. No, you just cannot. If you're a foreigner, you cannot. That's it. So it's a hard stop to the ability. So de facto, they're not giving any option to Italians to buy in Canada. The only exceptions are structural and are similar to exceptions that apply to Italians who want to buy in Australia, who don't have to go through the approval process if they are, for example, married to an Australian, if they have an immigration permit in Australia. So the same if we look at the reverse, if you are an Australian with a European passport, many Australians have British passport. And many Australians come to us and say, I cannot buy a home in Italy, how can I do it? And then during the conversation, their British citizenship comes up. So, okay, you are a British citizen, you can buy with that. And they feel that they should hide it, that they have also the Australian. They think that they feel that as they were breaking the law somehow, being this, withholding some information that they should disclose. But actually, it doesn't, at that point, your Australian nationality doesn't matter anymore. Right. Okay. What matters is that you are a British citizen and you are buying it as a British person. Right. So, and that there are a lot of Australians who have British passport. But if you have European passport, it works the same way. You don't have to hide the fact that you have also an Australian passport. You can just declare that you have the European passport and you buy with that under that classification. And if you get an immigration permit, also that will allow you to buy a home in Italy without any notary saying anything, because the immigration permit, permesso di soggiorno, is also basically doesn't require reciprocity check. Once you're the permesso di soggiorno, the immigration permit, it means that you are a legal immigrant living permanently in Italy. Therefore, there is no need to verify reciprocity anymore.
Yeah, okay, good, good. In Australia, I think we have that buttoned up pretty good. It's really nothing to worry about. You go to the notile first, you find out if you can do it, and if you can, you move ahead. If not, you find another notile. No, no disrespect
Yeah.
intended, but you find another notile that's a little more familiar. Okay,